everyone, and welcome to What Would My Shrink Say, a podcast where you get inside the heads of a couple psychologists and see life through their eyes. You'll never be the same. Hey, Todd.
Dr. Wignall, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah. Today, I want to talk about a question I hear fairly often. Or it's not a question even. It's like some kind of a weird demand, but this is what I hear from people. I need to be more emotionally available to my partner. Do you ever hear this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or my partner is telling me I need to be more emotionally available.
That's what I hear a lot. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. and he, yeah. So go ahead. This was a good topic.
No. Why are you laughing? Why are we chuckling about this?
That word need is an important part of this comment.
Yeah.
When a client tells you they need to do something, that word alone kind of sets off a lot of psychologists' spidey senses.
Yeah, we're always on the lookout for rigid thinking, right? Like I must do this. I need to do this. I should do this.
Yeah.
And it's, there are things you need to do your taxes, right?
Definitely.
You need to feed your children. Like there are things you need to do. But it can be those needs and shoulds can be slippery slopes, right? So I think that's why our little spidey senses go off when we hear stuff like this, right?
Yeah, behind those words tend to be a lot of rigidity and inflexibility and distress.
Potentially, yeah. Okay, so let's kind of reverse engineer our way into this, like emotional availability. Like, what do you think that means exactly? Like, let's define our terms.
Well, I think in these kinds of situations where especially in a romantic relationship, let's say where one partner is telling the other partner, you need to be more emotionally available to me. It could mean one or two things. One, that they feel their partner isn't sharing enough of their emotional experience with them, or that their partner is not willing, able, or would like to kind of discuss emotion or emotional topics, I guess.
Yeah, totally. That's what, to my mind, there's two sides to that, right? There's
those two.
My wife is telling me I need to be more sensitive to her emotions and more receptive and, more validating or whatever. Or she wants me to share more of how I feel. Right. So I think that's a good, if this is an issue for you, it's useful to maybe clarify which one of those is this, or maybe and maybe it's both, but I think those are the two big kind of. You can get into trouble if you're confusing those or if you're unclear about those two.
Yeah, but it does seem to be either you're not sharing enough or you're unwilling to kind of hold that space for your partner to be in. One of those two.
Wait. This is a good therapist-y term. Hold that space for your partner. So let's say my wife has told me, when you go see Todd in therapy, this is what you really need to talk about. You're not being emotionally available enough. And what she means is I'm not holding space for her emotions like she would like me to. So what does that mean exactly?
I actually had a different idea in mind, but
no. Okay. Wait, what was your idea?
For example, your partner comes and says, I'm really having a hard time with this person at work and it's really stressing me out. And you launch right into problem solving for them or telling them what they need to do rather than saying, let me hold this space where you're frustrated and sad and I don't have to fix that, and so sometimes emotional availability can be you launch into problem solving rather than kind of just be okay with her being frustrated and disappointed in her situation.
So me being emotionally available might look like when you say holding space for, instead of me going into advice giving or problem solving or whatever, I just listen and I validate a little bit. It must be hard. I can see how that would be tough. And so you just let their emotions hang out. You acknowledge them, maybe you validate them, but you don't compulsively try to do something to give advice or change.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of what I intended. But two, I think what you were alluding to was that your feelings aren't being validated either by behavior or outcome or something like that, that because you won't talk to Todd about your feelings that I want you to talk about.
Yeah.
Your unwillingness to do that. Yeah.
That's the other one, right? Basically you suck at talking about how you feel. Right. I think that's the version of this, right? And this is a real thing, right? Like difficult emotions are difficult, obviously, by definition, right? They're hard. And part of that being hard is like talking about them. Like I look, my example of this is always like, if you're an adult, I'm assuming most of the people listening to this are adults. When was the last time you heard a grown adult say, I'm sad? Like probably never. Like I cannot think of a time when I have like recently, outside of the context of therapy, where someone has said like, I'm sad. It's always like, oh, I'm stressed, or I'm really hurt, or, you know, I'm bummed out, or I'm depressed, or
like no one's listening to me. I feel,
yeah. So these are all symptomatic often of this thing where we kind of dance around the actual feeling, right? And I think, I'm curious about your take on this, but to me, it's basically just an avoidance strategy. Saying I'm sad is more raw. It's more vulnerable. It's, in some ways, it's more honest. It's just like, yes, I am sad, right? I'm literally sad. Whereas saying like, well, I'm bummed out, using a metaphor, or I'm just really, you know, stressed out, or I'm really hurting, right? These are all kind of like metaphors, or they're a little more guarded, right? Ways of describing what's going on with us, and kind of keeping the feeling itself, like the raw emotion, like at a little bit of a
numbing
distance.
it a little bit.
Yeah. Right. So I think this is it's a common like habit I think a lot of us fall into, which is we sort of, in the language we use to describe what's going on with us or how we're feeling, I call it intellectualizing, right? We sort of, instead of just talking about the raw feeling, we kind of wrap it in this like metaphorical or overly intellectual verbal package, right? Instead of I'm afraid, it's I'm stressed out. Instead of I'm sad, it's I'm super bummed out right now, you know? So that can be a common, like if people in your life are complaining or giving you feedback that you need to be more emotionally available, more expressive of how you're feeling, that could be a part of it. Right? I don't know. Do you ever run into this? Our thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode of What Would My Shrink Say? As therapists, Todd and I know how painful emotional struggles can be. From anxiety and low self-esteem to relationship conflict and self-doubt, painful patterns of thought and emotion are brutal to live with and tragic in how they sabotage our goals and aspirations. And while we hope this podcast is a helpful starting point, there's no substitute for working one-on-one with a professional therapist. BetterHelp is the easiest way to find a great therapist who's great for you. When you sign into their secure online platform, they'll assess your specific needs and match you up with a licensed professional therapist so you can get started in as quickly as 48 hours. And with a network of over 20,000 professional therapists, it's available to anyone worldwide. You can log into your account anytime to message your therapist or schedule weekly video or phone sessions. Visit betterhelp.com/whatwouldmyshrink-say to get started right away. And as listeners of the show, you'll get 10% off your first month when you sign up using our link, betterhelp.com/whatwouldmyshrink-say, which you can also find in the show notes. Once again, our thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring the show.
Yeah, definitely. I'm surprised. As a psychologist, I think I'm really good about talking about how other people feel. But I definitely have had people tell me, you know, you've just talked for a long time. I don't know how you feel about that, you know, and it's because, you know, it is maybe a way that it's harder for me to talk about how I feel about something than just to kind of talk about how somebody else feels about it, which
Totally.
I'm not emotionally available in that way. I guess I got to look at that.
Maybe you're not as emotionally available as you could be, not as emotionally expressive or vulnerable as you could be.
But no matter which end of that situation you're on, I think whether it feels like your partner's telling you you're not sharing enough, or you're not kind of allowing, you know, my emotions to be and validating them. My thought about this topic was I usually start encouraging people to practice authentic behaviors in line with this, right? So in other words, if their partner is saying, hey, you're not sharing enough of how you feel, the idea that you're going to share things only because your wife is upset with you, that's a really I wouldn't encourage that kind of response. But I would say, you know, if you can authentically kind of back up and say, you know, I do want to work at that, and I can start a little bit of at a time and kind of sharing how I feel in these occasions, and I'm willing to do that authentically and see how that goes. I'm all for something like that. But usually when this question comes up, or this comment of I need to be more emotionally available, that need is such a critical part of that statement, or that like I should be almost.
Yeah.
Because man, that forces a lot of weird, inauthentic behavior, and you don't learn much inside inauthentic behavior. It's,
in other words, if you're not doing it for a reason that really matters to you, if you're doing it just to check a box or keep someone happy or something like that.
Yeah, there's not a lot of learning going on for you, and probably some resentment and frustration growing as you do this thing that you really don't want to do.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, so I usually encourage clients when this topic comes up, to look at, which one do you want to work on, or do you authentically really want to work on that? And if so, where are you okay trying something new? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So to really kind of turn inward and reflect on do I need to be a little bit more, would it be good for me? Would it be good for us?
Do I want to be? Yeah. Do I want to be? Could there be some benefits to that? And, but I don't usually encourage people at the outset to start changing their behavior because their partner thinks they should, or because they're telling themselves they need to, or have to, or should.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the kind of irony here is that probably all of us could be better at being more emotionally available, right? Like this is probably something everybody could benefit from working on. I would think, I certainly could be better about this. And I'm a psychologist and talk about this stuff all the time.
Yeah, there's probably room for improvement. I think it is important to say, man, authentically, is that something, you really want to pursue? Is it a huge deal to you? Because man, doing those things under those shoulds again. But yeah, there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, I think the motivation matters, and making sure you're doing it for the right reasons is important.
Yeah, especially around emotional availability in a relationship. It should be a very voluntary thing, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to kind of open up authentically and honestly if you're doing it because you feel like you have to, or you're going to get revenge is going to come down upon you if you don't do it.
And I think when you mentioned this topic, this was my driving point, was like, ooh, man, when it comes in that form, it's so brutal, because the steps to becoming more emotionally available in any which way you decide would necessarily be fairly obvious. You want to authentically move into those spaces and get more and more comfortable. Maybe you start by saying, hey, when I come home from work, I kind of want to share a little bit more about whether there was a good day or not. And maybe I can talk a bit in those terms pretty lightly. And once that feels comfortable, maybe I can share more about over here. But, I don't really want to share some of these feelings over there. And authentically, I don't.
That's a great point too. Okay. Like you're not necessarily under any obligation to be perfectly transparent about everything.
Well, for example, sometimes I get asked how my day was at the end of work. And I'm like, the last thing I want to do at the end of my day is kind of recount every conversation I've had through the day. I kind of want to let those conversations simmer and fade. And I think go through
that's a great point, because I think one thing we don't necessarily realize is that different people have different preferences for how they share their experiences, right? So for instance, like some people, as soon as they've had a difficult day, they want to talk it out, like they want to talk it through, right? That's their style, right? Other people really want to let that kind of sit and marinate a little bit and let themselves process it for a while first. So it's important to be careful. And I know personally, I'm a let's talk it out right away. If something's going wrong, let's talk it out, right? But I know other people in my life, especially my wife, that's not necessarily the way she always wants to process things. So I do think that's a great point, that your kind of style of processing and sharing how you're feeling matters. And you, in any kind of relationship, you guys need to be on the same page about understanding where the other person stands,
or at least functionally respect it for each other. I mean, it's awfully hard sometimes to be on the same page, especially if you're really different in how you want to handle things. Hey everyone, Nick and I really appreciate you listening to the podcast. Please rate us on iTunes if you get a chance. And if you have any feedback or comments for us, that'd be great as well. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in the podcast, let us know in the comment section as well. Thanks.